Your novel, if you have read, the little intro they give you, it sounds to me, or could lead people to think that it's what we call a campus novel. The sort of campus novels that David Lodge wrote a couple of decades ago or more. But it's also a mystery. So you are the author. How would you, which of those two etiquettes, if any, you would feel more comfortable under?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I answer you, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I think I was trying to recruit 2 or 3 people to come to my session, but there are more than 2 or 3. So thank you for being here. And thank you, JLF, for organizing this. And thank you, Susana, for, it takes a lot to read someone's book and prepare questions, and I feel like that's a harder job than talking about your own work. So to answer your question, I didn't set out to write a campus novel, and I definitely didn't set out to write a mystery. However, as I started to go along, I just felt like the story, of course, had to be set on a US campus because it's a really fertile place for storytelling and especially for satire, and I work at a university, so it's what I know. But also, I think part of it is that I wouldn't necessarily call it a campus novel. However, I've taken some of the traditions and the tropes and the conventions of the campus novel and turned them on their head, right? Especially, I hope you agree, because I especially wanted to mess with this sort of, we have these like David Lodge, and I love campus novels, and a lot of really wonderful writers have written campus novels, but typically they tend to be this white male English professor who's sort of bumbling but has reckoning and a great moment of triumph in the end, and it all makes sense, and I wanted to take that and mess with it and not have it follow the same trajectory and the same arc. So in that regard, it was fun to mess with that. And then the mystery thing, I think I just watch a lot of detective mystery and crime and really dark, deep, like the Scandinavian noir and the British detective series and stuff. And so that started to happen I realized, like, just holding that tautness of what happens in the book became exciting to do.
Well, we cannot say much about what happens in the book because if you haven't read it yet, you should read it, and we should not just let too much. But one of the things that shocked me when I opened the book for the first time, and I think it happens to everybody, you read, okay, this is a novel about a relation between a male professor and a female colleague, whatever, and you open, and instead of the expected, which would be you were the female voice, you have taken the male voice. The book is narrated in the first person, and the male is speaking throughout. So why did you do that first? And how difficult was that to get the right tone? Because it sounds pretty male to me, but I'm not sure exactly how did you manage to get the right tone, which you did.
Thank you for saying that, that I did, because I didn't want to caricature. I wanted to write a white male, middle-aged white male English professor's point of view, but I didn't want to make this, typical caricature of, an evil, racist guy or something. But the choice actually, I was attending a previous session where Manjul Bajaj actually said that she has control over her characters, and I was just thinking like, oh my goodness, that must be nice, because I feel like I don't as much, and until I do, right? Like, so initially, I'm following what the characters want to do, and for me, this character, I had earlier planned to write the book from 3 points of view, of the Pakistani woman who's a law professor, and this white man who's an English professor, and the woman's nephew who comes from France, Adil, who's a teenager, 15-year-old. And I was writing these 3 points of view, and I found that I kept, this white man's voice just kept interrupting and taking over the story, and then I kept writing from his point of view. I would go back, erase it, and then rewrite it, and I realized, oh my goodness, I think this man wants to tell the whole story. And I realized, it's part of like negotiation with the author and the character, and I realized, okay, so I'm going to have to let him tell the story, but I'll tell it from under his skin and sort of, do this little subterfuge, by taking over. He thinks he's telling the story, but really I am, right? So I did that. And then it started to really work. Because it started to rush out of me, right. And I realized, oh my goodness, this is a voice. I didn't know this voice was in me. And then I did give it to 2 white male friends, and I said, make yourself useful. Read the book and give me some feedback and tell me if I have nailed the voice. And they said, I think I told you over dinner yesterday what they said. I don't know if it's okay to say here, but they said he needs to think a little more about sex. That's the feedback I got. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. So the second and third draft had him a little more, lean into that aspect a little more. But I think this book definitely took multiple drafts. And as I did more drafts, it got more and more complex and a little more rooted in his voice.
Well, one of the reasons I don't want to tell what's going on in the book is that it was always said, I remember when I studied literature, Roald Dahl and people like that, the twist in the tail sort of short story. I lost count of how many twists in the tail are here. I mean, whenever you think you are on solid ground, then she goes and twists everything again. It's like, oh my God. So that takes a lot of planning. I mean, you have had to prepare. How is your creative process when you have to control the action and really twist it just the little bit that keeps your attention, but not too much to baffle the reader. So how do you do that?
Yeah, that's where all the television watching came in use, and which is why I always say, watch a lot of television. It's all work. It's all work, such hard work. And so because I loved when there are twists, and I hated because I usually can tell who done it. I can usually tell, oh my goodness, this is what's going to happen. And I hate being right because I like to be surprised. And so for me, that was really important. However, we are talking about some really dark themes in this book. So it's not necessarily just like a little detective story or something, right? Or a little crime story or any other kind of narrative of that sort. So I think what was really important for me was, so what I did was really the scene, I went with the scenes that came to me. And one of the first scenes I wrote actually was the penultimate scene where the incident that he's telling us about, that happens, right? So and once I had that down, and then the next scene I wrote is about this 15-year-old boy in Toulouse in France who's watching the police go up to his mother and tell her to take off her headscarf or her hijab. And so then I was like, how do I are these the same story? And how do this white man from America, how is he going to meet this boy? And so then the rest of I had to figure out how, and this was, 2 ends of the novel, and I needed to figure out how this whole arc takes place. And I think the story started revealing itself to me. Then I would go research a little more, and had to do research with French Muslim families because I knew nothing about that world. So yes, putting all these little pieces together and holding on to the tautness of the narrative so that we know that this is an unreliable narrator and he's lying about something, but we don't know what the lie is, and to sort of keep it going to the end. It became both exhausting, losing
the
sleep.
Tension,
So I was losing a lot of sleep over it, but that was so much fun.
Well, it didn't really work out. But one of the things that also surprised me when I read the novel is set in a very specific time in recent U.S. history, which is between the month and the 2 weeks leading up to the elections that gave the victory, contrary to what many of us expected, to Donald Trump. I remember perfectly well going to sleep in my home country in Spain, perfectly confident that she was going to win. To wake up to the news the following morning and say, oh my God, what has happened? That feeling is in the novel. But why did you choose that particular moment in recent American history to be the framework of your novel? And
yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a recent immigrant, well, recent as in 20 years, right? I grew up in India, in Bombay, and moved to the US. And of course, we had the sense of the US as a certain kind of country. There's a sense of entitlement and, all this, the brutal past and everything. But its actual deep-seated racism, and sense of a sort of cruelty and a colonization, of the mind and of souls, revealed itself to me over a period of time. And so when the Trump and Hillary elections were happening, I was actually closer to where you are. I was in France starting to write this novel, which I knew it was a little bit about Islamophobia and things. Similar to you, I go to bed, right? And I get a ping in the middle of the night from my son, who was in Seattle, and he says, oops, I think we all got it wrong. Sorry about that. And I was like, what is he apologizing for? What is he talking about? And I realized, oh my goodness, this has actually happened. Trump has won. And so that sort of then took over my sense of things as well. And then Trump was talking about the Muslim ban at the time, right? So this is 2016, November. I'm sitting in France at a writing retreat after doing all my interviews with French Muslim families and writing this. And I realized this kind of deep Islamophobia in the US and this kind of white fundamentalism, this sort of white supremacist kind of thing, it's been there all along. And people of color in the US, of course, have been talking about it forever, and it's just going to rear its ugly head more and more. And so I wanted to write about that time. There was another reason, which is I think times of tumult, times where there was the before time and the after time, right? Before Trump became president and after Trump became president. That Trumpism has always been around, but it's pivotal, right? I think those are things that we remember. You remembered where you were when this happened. And I think those also, just in terms of a device, become really important places in which to situate stories, because we all remember who we were at that time, where we were, and what we were thinking and what we were dreaming of and what happened after.
And I mean, let's say, in order not to tell too much, let's say this is a love story, shall we? To a certain extent. Okay, yeah. To a certain extent. Between aging white male from a Western culture and a younger female Pakistani professor of law. And constantly you have his voice, but you have this otherness, right? This definition of who she is and who he is in relation to her, as the need we always seem to have to define ourselves in a position to the other. So why did you choose that otherness as one of the key themes of your novel? And how problematic maybe that became, not only, for you to write and maybe in the reception, if you had any feedback on that?
Oh, that's a great question. And I mean, it's got a few layers of answers. One is, I have loved a white man, right? So I was married, my second husband was a white man. This is a lot of revelation, but... And
at least you're not telling the plot of the novel, so that's okay.
It's not the plot of the novel, but there's a certain kind of navigation and negotiation of otherness in an intimate relationship of that kind, right? So there's a deep, there's love and there's appreciation, but there's also, if you don't manage the differences, it can go horribly wrong. And so I think one of the things I wanted to explore in this book was who is doing all the work of understanding the other, right? So as someone who immigrated to the US and as a woman of color in the US, I have to do a lot of work in order to not assimilate, but enculturate myself to whiteness, right? And to a white American way of being. And I think we do that very well. If you grew up in India, you're reading a lot of English literature, you do the work, and it feels almost easy, to fit in, and you know that you're going to do it. However, if there is love from the other side, how much of that work is being done from the other side as well, right? So that's something that I was curious about. Who fits into whose reality, and is a shared sense of values enough, or does politics get in the way? And how can it not get in the way? Because look at the world that we live in. You're going to have to negotiate, and who has to shut something down inside? And so that's something I wanted to navigate as well. And I actually didn't know, I didn't know how it would turn out for, I mean, I knew the incidents that would take place. And in, you know, this Oliver Harding, this character that is having these feelings for Ruhaba, I actually feel like, I feel bad for him because he's also been set up in a way by his own world. You know, he's been enabled and enabled and enabled and forgiven and forgiven and forgiven. And then it comes to a head where it just feels like, well, if he's never been asked to step outside himself and live in another person's shoes, how can we expect that from him after a certain period of time? He's just going to keep getting away with things, you know.
But it's also an otherness from her point of view, as a you know, someone who has to constantly negotiate her religion because of the visible feature of the hijab. And there is, I think, one incident, we're not going to say too much, but you know, when she's pointed as
a Muslim,
because of the hijab. I mean, this is the moment of otherness. Like, you know, she's taking out almost of a you know, public space and singled out because of her way of dress. I mean, how important is that sometimes in the way we assimilate or we don't?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not a Muslim woman, right? And I'm not a Pakistani, so it was very important for me to do that research really well because I didn't want to seem to be appropriating a Muslim woman's voice and trying to tell her story. And I didn't want to get it wrong, right? And also, you know, with the tensions between India and Pakistan and between Hindus and Muslims in here and, you know, the dynamics of that, I had to be very, very careful that I wasn't misrepresenting or also seeming like some sort of a savior, you know. So I had to tread all those things. And in order to do that, you know, my training is as a journalist and an academic, so I turned to research. So I did a lot of research on the hijab and the sense of control, but also the sense of navigating something in America. So, you know, even Hillary, during those election debates in the US was saying, we want Muslims to be the eyes and ears for America. We want the good Muslims to be the eyes and ears on the bad Muslims, you know, sort of creating this binary. And it was so problematic, I thought, you know. So I wanted to take that and do something with that and really look at the othering and the Orientalism against Muslim women, especially in the US. And I talked to a lot of Muslim women, students, faculty on US campuses and see what was their experience, and then also give it to them to read after and make changes if they suggested something, and then go back to the research and then partly just sort of inhabit Ruhaba, like, which I had to do with all the characters, like, you know, they be them a little bit. So yeah, that she's navigating that otherness as well, and there's a point of, you know, where there's a rejection of all that work.
All that work.
Yeah.
There's another thing that I thought it was a sort of a recurring theme in all your characters in the book, which is fear. They are all afraid of something. Afraid of shootings, afraid of living, afraid of committing, afraid of the world, afraid of everything. I mean, how important you think, I mean, you have, even the police is afraid. Everybody is afraid. How do you overcome that? I mean, how do your characters, each of them, you must have thought about this a lot, because each of them is going to overcome their own fears in a different way. So how important for you was the topic or the theme of fear as central to the novel?
Yeah, you know, it's said that everything we do either out of love or out of fear.
Right.
You know, so it was important for me to take both those themes and put them together in the story and see what are the choices these three characters are going to make. Are they choosing love in this moment, or are they choosing their fear? Are they giving in to their fear? And yes, so the fear, I wanted it to be palpable, because I think we live in fearsome times or fearful times. Both are correct. Thank you. And you know, when we are called to go beyond fear, I mean, I don't know if I am able to do that myself. I think I live in fear of, you know, several things. And so what a great thing to do, and, you know, mess with other people's fear in writing fiction and say, like, yeah, looks like maybe you don't get over it. And I think over the past few years, it's just intensified. I think we all are sort of a little bit coiled in fear and anxiety. And I think, you know, if we are coming out of a pandemic and we're with all these things happening, the rise of the right across the world, I think we're justified in being fearful, you know. And the boy Adil too, unfortunately, is not immune to the fear because the adults around him are so fearful.
Yeah. And then another thing that also, I mean, apart from which is the construction of your novel, which we talked about before, how you keep on twisting the tale and keeping the reader constantly surprised, on edge, is the idea of the expectations. I mean, you start with the man's expectations, right? The female's expectations, the boy's expectations. And everybody seems to be playing everybody, which is part of the whole plot, to the point that it's only the young boy who seems to have to be honest in his expectations. I mean, everybody lies in real life, yeah. Most of your characters also lie. The boy seems to be honest. I mean, is the boy the real hero of the novel? How expectations and heroism play together?
Yeah, I love that you think of him as a hero because, you know, he's such an ordinary boy with ordinary wants. And that seems to be heroic now. Like, you know, just having ordinary desires and wanting a normal world and an ordinary world has become heroic. And it takes heroism on our part to want that and to desire that, you know. And I was having this conversation with my son where I had him read, because he's my cruelest and truest editor, right? He will be like, nope, this is crap. So I give him, you know, drafts to read, and he's a young man. And so I said, you know, does Adil come across as too pure, or, you know? And he said, no, he comes across as normal. Like this is what normal should be, rather than extra special or sweet or something like that. And it's just that we've strayed so far away from what ought to be normal that we start congratulating people on just being decent human beings, you know, and we think that, oh, you're such a great guy. Like, I hate the term great guy, and we use it a lot in the US. He's a great guy, and it's like, great, it actually means something, you know? Like, let's not use that so loosely. But yeah, I think the sense of ordinariness and expecting decency from human beings has become greatness now. So yes, Adil is a hero in a way to want those things, you know.
And expectations?
Expectations, yeah. I mean, I think that's what good fiction for me. You know, the characters, and when I teach this, I say, like, what does your character desire, right? What do these people want? And just keep going, asking that question over and over again. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And I think that it makes for good writing. So I always feel like imbuing each character with deep expectations and desires will sort of keep a character compelling in the story.
So, I mean, one of the topics that inevitably, and I think you've already had that in some of the reviews that you had, you know, to the book, is this is almost not I would say a clash of cultures, but it's certainly the East finding the West or vice versa. What is your, I mean, is it always going to be like this? Is East going to always be East and West? Because you're very critical of some of the positions in American academia about Orientalism, and at one point you have some characters criticizing openly Edward Said and things like that. So are we really so far away, and are we always going to be that far away that we cannot understand each other? I mean, is this a continuum? Is there no way that we are going to be able to talk instead of constantly surprise each other?
I hope not, you know. I hope I'm, you know, in my most honest and purest state, I guess, I wish for an understanding. I wish for love. I wish for that kind of deep forgiveness and a deep sense of reconciliation and healing and all of those things. But I think we're in a bad place right now, you know. I think everywhere. I think somehow the idea of divisions has given us a sense of identity, has deepened our own sense of, like, I am someone because I hate someone, or I am someone because I'm different from that person. And I think that is so damaging, but I really, really want to hold on to hope. And I do believe, let's just put that out there, that on my best days, I believe that is possible. I think maybe we're headed to a certain place where we're just going to have to work together to haul in the same direction. I thought the pandemic was it, like, hey, this is a global thing. Let's all work together to haul in the same direction. But we went back to our old ways really quickly. Yeah.
So what's next now for you? I mean, you've done this, I repeat it again, a wonderful novel. Not a campus novel, but what is, you are an academic, what is the next project you have in your hands, if you could give us a peek of it?
I started work on a new novel. It's not from the white male perspective. So that's
that voice is gone.
Is done, at least for a while. I mean, there might be a white male that shows up in the book, but it's from a woman's perspective. And yeah, I mean, it's still, in its fresh stages. But I kind of like satire. Like, this book is satire, and I kind of like doing that. So social, commenting on how we are with each other in public and in private is really where I find gold, So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm digging sort of for more gold now. Yeah.
Right. Is betrayal also big in your next novel? Because betrayal is big in this novel.
Yeah, I love betrayal. I love it. Yeah. So yes, there will be some betrayal, but also love. I think I'm writing a love story right now. I wouldn't say it's a romance, really, not in that in terms of the genre, but I just want to write a simple love story where some people at least do nice things.
Like Adil.
Yes, like
and
Adil, exactly.
The young boy who's madly in love with this girl.
Camille, and he just wants to go home and ask her out to the movies. Yeah, exactly.
The simple, easy things in life.
Yeah.
Not set in a campus, you said.
I don't know. I think inevitably, because I spend so much time on a campus, I think some characters are going to end up on a campus, but I'll keep taking them out on a sabbatical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leave them on a sabbatical.
Yeah.
So I think we have now some time for questions, which I'm sure the author would be delighted to take. Yeah? Is there a microphone going somewhere? I think the lady in the front line.
There's someone here, I think.
Maybe we could. So maybe, yeah.
Hello. Yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. My question is that custom, tradition, and usages of any community or society are challenges in the gender equality, gender discourse, and gender sensitization. Do you think that
Yes.
is a challenge?
Yes,
May
absolutely.
I know your opinion on this?
Oh, my previous book is called How to Raise a Feminist Son, and it's entirely dealing with that. I mean, I do think our expectations of is that right? Expectations of gender norms and our tradition do cause a lot of harm in terms of having women live full lives with full agency and desire and everything, right? So even now people will say, oh, I allow my wife to work outside the home, or those kinds of things, and people don't bat an eyelid on that, and it just irks me so much, because I feel like we're still talking about being allowed, we're still talking about those things, and so it's taken a long time, and those are the traditions, I think, that we need to, I'm doing my bit by making myself very uncomfortable in my life by bucking some of these traditions. It's not easy. It's just really, really hard. Like, I raised my son as a single parent and things, and you have to keep walking away from certain things. And but after a while, I think it gets easier because, and here's the thing, right? Like, in growing up in India, I was told if you end up, if you break too many rules, you'll end up lonely and scared and unstable. I feel more stable, more connected, and more, there's fear, we talked about it, but that's not coming from at least someone in the home. Like, the call is not coming from inside the home, right? I think we need to break some of those rules and really educate and not, I mean, I don't think I do it out of a sense of rage or anything there was in the past, but a sense of, again, love. You know, I love my son, and so I need to teach him to break those rules along with me. You know. There's someone right there in the back there.
Just before the, yeah. Or we'll comment on that later.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah. So recent years we have seen that a lot of American Indian, American Chinese people are coming up talking about books, but these are usually first, second generation of kids. And there's also a parallel debate going on that do they have the lived experience to talk about India or China or Asia in general? So what's your thought on that, people who are first or second generation, talking about the issues that are facing like in the South Asia and all?
Yeah, I mean, all those perspectives are important, right? Because everyone's lived experience merits a story. Everyone's lived experience. So I cannot say to a first generation or second generation South Asian American, hey, you don't know anything about India, you shouldn't. They know about some kind of version of India, and that's a very important story to tell, right? So I think like we just need so many more stories than we actually have. You know, we need Adil's story, who is, you know, a Pakistani boy, who, like his parents were from Pakistan, but he's a young Frenchman, and comes from France, and he goes to America, and he has a whole other perspective. And knowing, I mean, for me, it was so revealing to talk to French Muslim families and imagine them in America, you know, to really get to know these stories. And so I think the more stories we have, I don't think anyone should say, you don't know anything about India. You know, when I've lived in the US for a long time, so people say, oh, you know nothing about India, don't comment on India. And I'll say, no, I do know some things, right? I have a sense of a lived experience that is different, and I'm not claiming to be living in India and living those experiences of another Indian here. I want those stories, right? I want to hear those stories, but I also want to hear the stories of people who have wandered, you know.
Okay. For more questions. The mics can go around here and yeah.
There's a young woman there. Oh yes, please.
Hello.
Hello.
We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted one question. You have written from the male point of view, very brave of you, really. And now you're going to write from a female point of view. What are you more comfortable with? Because as a female, you have experienced everything. As a male, you haven't. What are you more comfortable with?
That's such a great question. You must be a professor of English literature, I think. Weirdly enough, it was easier for me to write from a white male perspective. It took a little bit of work, but that was it was a different kind of work. It wasn't like sort of digging deep into my own soul and myself. When I write about myself or from a female's perspective, I do think there's a self-consciousness. There's all this sense of like wanting to represent other women, wanting to represent it all, you know, write the whole experience, and it's hard to see which one to pass out and, you know, what makes a good story, and is that story just in my head, or, you know, so all those other things come up. So I think in terms of putting things on a page, the white man's perspective was just easier because it was playful in a sense. But I think the woman's perspective, writing from the woman's perspective, it takes more of an emotional, it's more emotional work. Yeah.
There was a question over there. Oh, that lady, yeah.
There's a girl there too.
Yeah, hello. So my question has to do with feminine rage. Like you talked about how you almost have empathy for this white male character who has so much entitlement and is definitely not the best person ever. And you talked about how you've now found love in a way to respond to things that are like, and you've let go of that rage. How are you able to do that? Especially because right now we're in a time where feminine rage has been glamorized. Like there's, you know, Gone Girl moments of like there's this slow drip of misogyny and you're trying to wash it off, but it's so big now and there's so much that these women can only respond by things like murder, violence, unhinged ways of responses. So with all of that deep resentment plus that sort of trend in media culture, how does one let go of that rage and try to find love and try to bring about actual change as opposed to just anger and emotion?
Yeah, thank you. That's a lovely question. What a layered question that is. Thank you. I do think that there's a place for rage. I do think there's a place for deep anger. There are things we need to be angry about, I mean, there's stuff happening in the world. And so I think tapping into that and expressing it and channeling it as rage rather than sweetening it or anything because you want to be a palatable woman or whatever. I think we need to express that. However, yes, I mean, you don't want to, like be a mass shooter or anything. So, what are those channels of rage? I think writing helps. Writing and telling stories helps, and talking to people and saying there's a better place out there. Come with me. Express your rage or do your rage and burn it all down and let's go to a different place, right? Or create a better world. I think that there's that, right? But also, yeah. I mean, I think. Being open to love, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have given a different response. But being open to love and to understanding, I think it comes from a position of power. And that's the reason why women need to claim power and men need to step aside a little bit. Because once you have power and you have agency, I think you're better able to love. And so I think because you're not afraid of losing power, you're not sort of watching your back all the time. You have more of an expansive way to love. I hope that answers that. Yeah. There was someone, yeah. There was one.
For one more question or two. Yeah. So
there.
Send the microphone over here.
Am I audible? Good afternoon, panel. So I just wanted to ask this one question because I've been seeing this debate around the book community lately. So I've not read this book. I just picked it up today. I'm really sorry for my ignorance. But from the tidbits that have been dropped today by both of you, I just felt, or this is just a blind guess, I'm guessing that this book ends on an ambiguous note. So I just wanted to ask, like as a reader as well as a writer, do you prefer endings that are ambiguous? So what do you prefer?
Does it end on an... we are being
no,
ambiguous.
we have... Okay, we have agreed not to reveal, but believe me, it's not... the end is not ambiguous at all.
Yeah,
no.
we are being ambiguous about
We are being ambiguous because we don't want to give away the wonderful plot.
Yeah.
So you all buy the book and read it, as you should.
Yeah.
But I'm not being paid for this, right? Really, it's not ambiguous at all. But
yes, in a way, it ends on a question about the bigger ideas that I explore in the book, right? In terms of the actual story and what happens, it's not ambiguous, right? So I don't want the reader to ever feel closure. I do not want to ever let the reader say, okay, done with this story, And it's really lovely to hear from readers that, oh my goodness, your book is just like haunting me. It's like, yes, thank you, So yeah, I think those ideas are really important to stay with, and I hope for that.
I think it's one last question. Okay. The one last question to the gentleman over there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
So firstly, I have read the book and it's awesome. I recommend it
highly
we agree. For everybody.
We already agree, right?
Yes, and I'm not giving away the ending, although I wish it was different, but that's a different story. My question was really coming back to voice. The process of arriving at Oliver telling the whole story as opposed to it being either Adil or Ruhaba. And I love the names, by the way. I thought Ruhaba was just brilliant. But that process of arriving at that voice, you've talked about that a little bit. But how would it change the book if it was, let's say, Ruhaba telling the story? Because in many ways, it's her story as well. So just if you could just throw a little light on that.
Yeah, I mean, the typical thing, as you said, would have been for me to write from Ruhaba's point of view. But it was really also important for me to not try to appropriate this Pakistani woman's, hijabi woman's voice. And so it was easier for me and more fun and definitely a political choice to appropriate the white man's voice, you know. I didn't have any compunctions about that. So I think in terms of that, it was like an experiment of like, you know, can I appropriate his voice, because our voices have been appropriated by white male writers for so long, you know. So it was one of those things that I wanted to do. But I think for sure, one of the points I'm making in the book is the erasure of these voices, right? And the erasure of voices like Ruhabas that can, you know, do we get enough of these stories of the Ruhabas of the world? And I want the reader to feel the discomfort of not hearing her voice enough in the book. So I had to hold back, you know, and not reveal much from her point of view.
So I think this is all we have time for today. I would like to please join me in a round of applause to our wonderful author, Sonora Jha, The Laughter. Thank you.